The moment my wife, Margaret, passed away, my son, Kyle, delivered a harsh truth. He said I couldn't bring her back and that his own wife, Megan, only had a birthday once a year. His words felt like a physical blow. The following day, he approached me with a vital request, acting as though nothing had transpired between us. This presented an opportunity to respond to the deep insult he had aimed at me and at his late mother, and I decided to seize it. I remember my hands trembling as I dialed Kyle's phone number at 8:30 in the morning, making a third attempt to adjust the black tie I was wearing. Margaret's empty coffee cup was still on the counter, with a faint mark from her lipstick still visible on the rim. The kitchen felt so empty without the sound of her humming in the mornings. After 4 rings, Kyle answered, his voice sounding tired and groggy. I told him it was his father, straightening my shoulders, and explained that the funeral was scheduled to start at 11:30. Through the phone, I could hear loud, thumping music, laughter echoing in the background, and Megan's voice shrieking something about party decorations. Kyle cleared his throat and reminded me that he had already told me about Megan's birthday party that evening. He pointed out that they had been planning the party for many months. His words felt like a splash of cold water. I gripped the phone tighter. I explained that his mother's funeral was happening today, an event that would only happen once. Kyle repeated his point that his mother was not coming back, but his wife's birthday was an annual event. He mentioned that caterers and a band were setting up at their house. Your mother raised you for 35 years, and I appreciate that, he said in a cold voice. But I can't just abandon Megan on her special day. He then asked if I understood. I was met with the sound of a dial tone. I sat completely still for 3 minutes, staring at Margaret's reading glasses, which were right next to the phone. The clock in the kitchen showed 8:47 in the morning. The sunlight that streamed through the windows she had cleaned just last week caught the gold of my wedding ring. I noticed the funeral program on the counter. Kyle was listed as a pallbearer. I took a pen and, with deliberate strokes, scratched his name out. At the cemetery, people's faces turned to me, looking for something. Patricia, Margaret's sister, repeatedly asked where Kyle was. I had rehearsed my response, important commitments. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. There were 23 people there to honor my wife of 40 years. Her own son was not one of them. I stood by the casket by myself, surrounded by Margaret's friends from her garden club and our old neighbors. The empty space where Kyle should have been felt huge. She was so proud of that boy, Mrs. Henderson whispered. She was always talking about his success. My throat felt tight, and I simply nodded. Margaret had defended Kyle all the way to her last breath. When he had missed her chemo appointments, she would say that he was just busy with his new life, and that young couples needed their space. The pastor spoke of family bonds and eternal love. I watched the dirt being shoveled onto the polished wood of the coffin, and with each shovel full, it felt as though I was burying not just Margaret, but also my beliefs about who our son was. On the drive home, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The passenger seat, which Margaret had always occupied, was now empty beside me. She had always insisted that we take her small Honda instead of my truck, saying it was better for the environment. Her favorite song came on the radio, and I immediately turned it off. Our street looked exactly the same, with its neat lawns and painted mailboxes, a testament to the life Margaret and I had built together. I pulled into our driveway and sat in the car for a moment, trying to find the strength to face the emptiness waiting for me inside the house. The key turned in the front door with its familiar clicking sound. I hung my keys on the hook Margaret had put up, a small, ordinary action that felt incredibly significant in the silent house. There was no humming from the kitchen, no low murmuring of the television, just the sounds of the house settling around the 40 years of memories it held. I loosened my black tie and sank into my armchair, the brown leather one that Margaret had always said didn't match her floral curtains. For years she had wanted to redecorate, but I had always been too busy building my business. Now, those curtains would remain there forever. A photo of our wedding smiled from the mantelpiece. It was Margaret at 23, glowing in her grandmother's dress. We had gotten married right here in Davenport and had promised each other everything we had. I felt I had kept that promise, perhaps too well. Uninvited, memories came flooding back. I saw Kyle taking his first steps across the living room, his chubby hands reaching for Margaret's outstretched arms. We had birthday parties with handmade decorations because we couldn't afford to buy them. I remembered Margaret working double shifts at the diner so I could get my construction company off the ground. She had never complained, not about my 16-hour workdays or the weeks we spent eating nothing but macaroni and cheese. After Kyle would fall asleep between us in our bed, she would whisper that we were building his future. He had been too young for his own room then. On her nightstand, I found her Bible with bookmarks still in place, marking the Psalms. A handwritten note fell from the pages. It read, "My dearest Alan, please don't let Kyle forget us. We gave him everything we had. I hope that was enough. All my love, M." My hands shook as I read her careful writing. In her closet, I found a special box she had hidden. Inside were all of Kyle's report cards, from kindergarten through college. Every A+ was celebrated, and every one of his achievements was treasured. On each one, she had written little notes, "So proud," and "Our brilliant boy." The graduation photos were the most painful. There was Kyle in his cap and gown, with a degree that had been paid for by Margaret's overtime hours and my weekend jobs. The total cost was around $200,000. I realized his proud smile never showed any acknowledgement of the sacrifice we had made for his success. I took out my calculator and began to add up the money. There was the $350,000 down payment I'd given him for his house, the $75,000 for his wedding to Megan, the $35,000 for his first car, and another $48,000 for the graduate school he had insisted on attending but never finished. There were also emergency loans for their vacations, Megan's shopping sprees, and their failed business ventures. Margaret's coffee mug was still in the dishwasher. Her romance novel was lying open on her nightstand, a bookmark waiting for eyes that would never read again. Get-well cards from friends covered the kitchen counter, from people who had seemed to care more about her final months than her own son did. The numbers continued to climb. Over 15 years, Kyle's total was $847,000. It was nearly $1 million from our lives, given with both love and hope. I thought about my own father, a tough man who had given me nothing but the expectation that I would make my own way. He had told me to build your own character. I wondered if he had been right all along. Darkness came outside, and I didn't bother turning on any lights. A car pulled into the driveway, its engine idling. I did not get up to check on who it was. I figured if Kyle wanted to talk to me, he knew where to find me. The engine revved, and the car drove away. At 6 a.m. I was sitting at my mahogany desk with file folders laid out in neat rows. One was labeled, Kyle Education, another, Kyle House, and a third, Kyle Wedding. My coffee grew cold as I opened the calculator on my computer to begin the reckoning that Margaret had been too kind to ever ask for. My reading glasses reflected the light of the computer screen as I accessed the bank records. It showed 15 years of transactions, each one marked as a transfer to Kyle or an emergency loan for Kyle. The only sounds in my new reality were the rustling of the papers in the quiet house. I started with his college tuition. It was 4 years at $52,000 each. I could still remember writing those checks. Margaret had been working extra shifts to pay our bills while our son was partying at Iowa State. Then there was graduate school, another $48,000 for an MBA he would never use, having dropped out of the program to go find himself in Europe. The European trip had cost $35,000. Just temporary, Dad, until I get established, he had said. The purchase of his house had almost ruined us. I remembered Kyle at 25, standing in our living room with Megan's engagement ring on his finger, saying they had found the perfect house but were short on the down payment. The down payment was $350,000. I had co-signed the mortgage and paid for every single penny of the down payment. Family helps family, Kyle had said, giving me a tight hug. He had promised to pay me back once his business took off. What business? I wondered to myself. He had been working for my company since graduating, earning a salary he hadn't deserved while learning skills I had hoped he would appreciate. Margaret's secret notebook fell out of the files. In her handwriting, she had documented every sacrifice. I read the painful notes: anniversary dinner cancelled. Needed $5,000 for Kyle's car repair. Postponed my doctor visit. Kyle's wedding costs higher than expected. Bought generic groceries this month. Sent Kyle money for Megan's birthday. Her final note was the most painful. We gave Kyle everything. I hope he remembers us kindly. The numbers on the calculator were still climbing. $847,000, more than $750,000. My father had only given me $20 in a handshake when I left home. I had built everything from nothing, while Kyle saw it all as his to spend even while we were still alive. I recalled him calling my company a family business last Christmas, as though he had helped me build it instead of simply walking into a ready-made position. Megan had nodded in agreement, already planning how to spend the profits I had earned from 40 years of hard work. My business mindset took over. I realized this was a problem that needed a solution, not an emotional situation that needed comfort. I had been too emotional for too long, always making excuses for behavior that Margaret herself had worried about privately. Maybe we're doing too much for him, she had whispered to me after Kyle's latest emergency. Her photograph watched from the corner of the desk as I closed the files. I stood up, filled with a new resolve. Something harder than grief had settled in my chest. I looked at her picture and told her that she had been right to worry. The phone rang and Kyle's name appeared on the caller ID. I stared at it for 4 rings before answering. Kyle's voice was cheerful as he asked if I was doing okay after yesterday. His voice had the familiar tone he always used when he wanted something. I noticed he did not mention the funeral specifically and did not ask how I was coping without Margaret. I told him I was managing, keeping my voice steady as I stared at the financial documents on my desk. Good. Good, he said. Listen, I'm calling because we have some unexpected costs to cover. He explained that Megan's party had been amazing, but they had, kind of gone overboard. He said I knew how it was, because you only turn 32 once, right? In the background, I could hear Megan's voice, telling him to tell him about the band. Yeah, he said, we hired an incredible live band, took everyone to that new steakhouse downtown, and got Megan a gorgeous diamond bracelet. You know, she deserves the best. He then admitted that the credit card bills were coming in and they needed about $15,000 in immediate payments. $15,000. I quickly did the math in my head. It would be the 47th loan in 15 years. Just yesterday, I had buried my wife. Today, my son was asking for money to pay for a party. He asked if I could just wire the money to his account that day, explaining that Megan was stressed about the bills and I knew how she got when she was worried. The silence stretched between us. I looked at Margaret's photograph and then at the neat columns of numbers documenting Kyle's total cost to our marriage. No, I said. There was a pause. What do you mean no? Is there a problem with the bank? He asked. I explained that I would not be giving him any more money. The cheerful tone disappeared from his voice. He asked if I was seriously saying no to him right now after everything they had been through this week. I thought about what he meant by everything we've been through, as though he had suffered through Margaret's funeral instead of throwing a party. I pointed out that he was 35 years old. He asked what that had to do with helping his son out of a jam, adding that it wasn't like I couldn't afford it. In the background, Megan's voice grew louder, telling him to tell me they needed the money and had already spent it. I repeated, I said no. The words felt strange in my mouth. It was the first time I had ever refused Kyle anything. This is unbelievable, he said, his voice turning cold. He said his mother had just died and I was being petty about money, and that she would have wanted me to help them. I noticed how casual and practiced his manipulation was. I wondered how many times he had used this tactic, and how many times Margaret and I had given in because he had invoked family loyalty. "Your mother wanted you at her funeral," I told him. Kyle's breathing grew harsh. He said they would figure it out themselves, and that they would max out more credit cards or borrow from Megan's parents. He then said not to expect them to visit much anymore if this was the way I was going to be. The threat hung in the air. For 35 years, it had worked perfectly. His presence had been a reward for my money, and his absence was a punishment for saying no. "I understand," I said calmly. "You what?" he asked. "I understand," I repeated. "Take care, Kyle." I hung up before he could say anything else. The phone sat silently on my desk, no longer an instrument of manipulation. For the first time in decades, I had ended a conversation with my son on my terms. I opened my laptop and scrolled to Kyle's employee file. I knew that tomorrow morning we would have a different kind of conversation, one that would take place in my office where I was the boss, not the father who had forgotten the difference. If Kyle wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would respond professionally. I arrived at the Foster construction lobby at 7:30 a.m., 2 hours before Kyle's usual arrival time. His employee photo was on the management wall, showing him smiling confidently in a suit that I had bought for him. As I looked at the picture today, I saw it with different eyes, seeing a sense of entitlement where I had once seen promise. In my office, Kyle's personnel files were spread across my desk, like evidence in a court case. 8 years of employment records revealed the true story: missed deadlines, complaints from contractors, inflated expense reports, projects that were delayed because Kyle chose long lunches over supervision, and client relationships that were damaged by his casual attitude towards his responsibilities. I had always made excuses for all of this, citing family loyalty and Margaret's gentle reminders that Kyle was still learning. However, these documents revealed a pattern of professional negligence that would have ended any other employee's career years ago. At 8:45, I called my HR director, Sarah Mitchell, into my office. I knew she would handle the paperwork properly. When I explained my decision, her face showed no surprise. She had been documenting Kyle's infractions for months, just waiting for me to act. She quietly said that she would prepare the termination documents immediately, and confirmed that a security escort was standard protocol for management terminations. I practiced what I would say in my office mirror, watching my reflection deliver the words with a steady, professional tone. There would be no emotion, and no explanation beyond what the law required. Kyle would enter this room as my son's employee and leave as a terminated worker. At 9:30, Kyle strolled in, 15 minutes late, joking with the receptionist about how he was recovering from Megan's party. His laughter echoed through the lobby while his coworkers nervously glanced towards my closed office door. He stopped at the coffee machine, completely unaware of the storm that was coming. "Kyle, please come to my office immediately," I said through the intercom, my voice carrying a new authority. Kyle's casual response drifted down the hallway. "Sure, Dad. Just let me grab my coffee." But I said, "Now, Kyle." The silence that followed showed me that he had heard the change in my tone. His footsteps came slowly, sounding heavier than usual. When he opened my door and saw Sarah waiting there with paperwork, his smile faded. "What's with the formal setup?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but a hint of uncertainty crept into his voice. I remained seated with my hands folded on the desk. "Kyle," I said, "your employment with Foster Construction is terminated, effective immediately." He gave a forced laugh. "Very funny, Dad." "What's this really about?" he asked. I slid the termination papers across the polished desk. "Please review these documents and sign where indicated." The papers felt like they were burning his fingers as he picked them up. His eyes scanned the legal language, and his face grew pale. "You can't be serious," he said. "This is our family business." My voice remained level and businesslike as I told him the decision was based on his work performance and professional conduct. I added that his position had been eliminated due to restructuring. "This is about yesterday's phone call, isn't it?" he said, his voice cracking slightly. He told me he was sorry about the money and that they could work it out. I told him that security would escort him to collect his personal items. His attitude shifted from disbelief to desperation. He leaned forward, trying to use the guilt tactic that had always worked before. "Mom wouldn't want this." "You know she wouldn't," he said. I pressed the security button. "This is a business decision," I said, "not a personal one." Mike Thompson came to the doorway, his demeanor professional yet sympathetic. Kyle's face flushed bright red as he understood that the humiliation was entirely real. His former co-workers had gathered in the hallway, watching as their boss's son was being escorted out as though he were a common criminal. Kyle made one last appeal to me, saying, "Dad, please. Think about what this means," as he grabbed his coffee mug and the photo of Megan from his desk. I met his eyes for the first time since the confrontation had begun. I told him that I had. From my office window, I watched him put his small collection of personal items into his car. His shoulders shook from either rage or grief, I couldn't tell which. When he looked back at the building one last time, I turned away. Sarah returned to the office with the signed paperwork. All access codes had been changed, and his computer access had been terminated. I took Kyle's photo down from the management wall myself and placed it face down in a drawer. The empty space on the wall looked cleaner somehow. My secretary knocked on my door gently and said that someone was here to see me without an appointment. I could hear the sound of designer heels clicking aggressively across the marble floor of the lobby. Megan stormed past the reception desk without waiting for permission, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled by the wind. Kyle followed behind her, looking embarrassed and defeated, a mere shadow of the confident man who had entered the building just an hour earlier. I heard her voice from the open office door, full of accusations as she pointed an angry finger at me. She wanted to know how I could possibly dare to humiliate Kyle like this. I remained seated, not acknowledging her theatrical entrance. Kyle tried to position himself between Megan and my desk, and his embarrassment deepened. He told her to let him handle this, but she completely ignored him. She informed me that they had bills to pay and a lifestyle to maintain, and that this family business also belonged to Kyle. I calmly told her that this was a private workplace and that she needed to leave. Her face flushed a deeper shade of red. She told me they deserved at least 6 months of severance pay, pointing out that Kyle had worked there for 8 years and that I owed them. Kyle's attempts at mediation were useless. He pleaded with me to discuss the situation privately. Megan immediately cut him off, saying that I needed to hear this. She told me she knew about wrongful termination laws. I replied that Kyle was an at-will employee and that no severance pay was required by law or contract. Megan's attacks became more personal with venomous precision. She felt that Margaret would have been ashamed of how I was treating her son, and she suggested that I was having some kind of breakdown, just a bitter old man who was taking his grief out on them. Kyle's face went white, and he pleaded with Megan not to say that. My jaw tightened, but I managed to remain calm. This was exactly the reaction I had expected from her, manipulation disguised as righteous anger. Kyle tried desperately to regain control. He told me that he knew he had messed up with the funeral and that he was sorry, but destroying his career would not bring his mother back. He pleaded with me to think about what this would mean for our family and for my future grandchildren. The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. I looked at this man who shared my DNA but none of my values. I thought to myself, what family? Megan's financial threats escalated quickly. She said they would sue me for their share of Margaret's estate, pointing out that Kyle was entitled to half of everything. She added that they knew about the life insurance policy. I said that Margaret had left everything to me, and the simple truth of it made her bluster momentarily deflate. She said that was impossible and that they were consulting a lawyer. As Megan's voice reached a dangerous level, I pressed the security button. Mike Thompson returned with a backup, and their presence filled the office doorway. Several employees had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. "I'm not leaving," Megan screamed as security approached. "This is theft. This is abuse." Her resistance was futile but loud. The entire office heard her threats and accusations as she was escorted out through the lobby. Kyle's humiliation reached new depths as he watched his wife being physically removed from his former workplace. When the noise faded, Kyle remained alone with me. His last-ditch emotional manipulation came in a whisper. "I'm all the family you have left." While his words were meant to break me, they had the opposite effect and clarified everything for me instead. I looked at the stranger who had worn my son's face for 35 years and delivered the truth he needed to hear. "No," I said, "you're just someone who used to be my son." Kyle's face crumbled. For a brief moment, I saw the little boy who had once run into my arms after school. Then the moment passed, and only the entitled stranger remained. He left without another word. I addressed my concerned employees with professional calm, explaining that this was a personal matter that would not affect business operations. Most of them nodded with understanding, having witnessed Kyle's poor performance for years. I instructed security to ensure that Mrs. Foster was never allowed in the building again. Alone in my office, I felt my hands trembling slightly. The hardest part was now over. I looked at Margaret's photo on my desk and told her I hoped she understood. I then opened my computer and searched for estate planning attorneys. It was time to start the next phase. I scheduled an appointment with Robert Chen for that afternoon, then noticed Kyle's birthday was marked on my calendar for next month. I deleted it permanently. The prestigious law offices of Chen and Associates were located on the top floor of Davenport's tallest building. I walked into the reception area at 2:30 p.m. Carrying my leather briefcase, which held Margaret's will, insurance documents, and the financial records that would shape my family's future. The receptionist recognized me immediately and escorted me directly to Robert Chen's corner office. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows overlooking downtown Davenport, illuminating rows of law books and active case files that created an atmosphere of serious business. Robert got up from behind his mahogany desk, and I could see the concern in his eyes. We had been friends for 20 years, and he had handled Margaret's will, my business incorporation, and countless legal matters that required discretion. He asked me how I was holding up, his voice filled with genuine sympathy. I declined his offer of coffee and sat in the leather chair across from his desk. I explained that I needed to make some changes to my estate planning. Robert's expression shifted into professional mode, and he said that updating beneficiaries after Margaret's passing was a standard procedure. "No," I said, as I opened my briefcase and took out the documents. "I'm removing Kyle entirely." The words hit Robert like a physical blow, and his professional composure faltered as he processed the implications. He told me he was obligated to ensure that I was thinking clearly about this decision. I explained Kyle's absence from the funeral, calmly, including his exact words about Megan's birthday party being more important. Robert's face darkened with each detail. As Margaret's friend and our family attorney, he understood the magnitude of Kyle's betrayal. I told him that I wanted to create a completely new will, and that the primary beneficiary would be the Margaret Foster Memorial Foundation. Robert leaned forward, and his concern now focused on the legal implications. He felt obligated to ensure that I was thinking clearly about this decision. I told him that I had never been more certain about anything in my life. I then outlined my vision: scholarships for underprivileged children, and funding for cancer research, both causes Margaret had supported throughout her life. Kyle was to be explicitly excluded, as were any future descendants. As I detailed the foundation structure, Robert's admiration for my plan grew. Moving company assets into an irrevocable trust would protect everything from potential lawsuits. I would retain control during my lifetime, with the foundation assuming ownership upon my death. Robert noted that we would also need to change all insurance beneficiaries, and he made detailed notes. He told me that this was extremely thorough planning. I had decided that the family home would be sold, and the proceeds would be donated to the foundation. Margaret's jewelry would be auctioned for charity. The only exception would be Margaret's wedding ring, which would be buried with me when my time came. What about Kyle's childhood belongings? Robert asked gently. I told him that they would be donated. I'm systematically removing Kyle from my life, I said. Robert fulfilled his professional duty by questioning my mental state and decision-making capacity. My rational responses and detailed planning demonstrated my clear thinking. He gradually shifted from concerned friend to admiring professional. The formal signing ceremony involved 2 legal witnesses from Robert's firm. My steady signature contrasted with the magnitude of each decision. Robert explained that these documents took immediate legal effect. Kyle was now completely disinherited. I instructed him to ensure that Kyle received a formal notice of this change. Additional legal protections followed quickly. There were power of attorney documents that removed Kyle's authority, medical directives that excluded him from healthcare decisions, and a living will with specific instructions about my care. Robert documented my mental competency thoroughly. I planned to visit the banks the following day to update all accounts, removing Kyle as the beneficiary from my retirement funds and investment portfolios. Robert offered to help coordinate with the financial institutions. The planning for the foundation brought me an unexpected sense of peace. I nominated Robert as a trustee, discussed the board structure, and planned the first scholarship recipients. Margaret's memory would be honored through education, something she had valued deeply. Margaret would be proud of this foundation, Robert said as we concluded our meeting. He added that she had always believed in education and helping others. For the first time in days, I felt genuine satisfaction instead of cold determination. Robert understood that this was not an act of revenge, but one of justice. My transformation from grieving father to purposeful philanthropist was now complete. We shook hands outside the law office. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Kyle, which was the first sign that he was realizing the seriousness of his situation. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them and walked towards my car. The next phase was waiting. The elegant lobby of the Davenport Country Club welcomed me with its familiar sense of luxury. Mahogany panels, crystal chandeliers, and oil portraits of founding members created an atmosphere of old money and established values. As the treasurer of the monthly board meeting, I had walked these halls for 15 years. 12 board members were gathered around the polished conference table, discussing routine club business before our official meeting began. The smell of leather furniture and fresh coffee mingled with whispered conversations about recent events. William Hayes, our board president, approached me with genuine sympathy. He said that the memorial service had been beautiful and that Margaret would have been pleased. I thanked him for the flowers. Patricia Morton, Margaret's sister and a longtime member, joined our conversation. She said that she had kept looking for Kyle at the service and asked where he had been. The question that I had been expecting hung in the air. I paused, then decided that telling the truth would serve Margaret's memory better than diplomacy. I told her that Kyle had chosen not to attend his mother's funeral. A shocked silence spread like ripples across water, and Patricia's face went pale. She asked me what I meant, that he chose not to. I then delivered Kyle's exact words, that Megan's birthday party was more important. The visible disgust on the faces of the board members told me everything about their values Kyle had abandoned. William's wife, Nancy, had been eavesdropping from the hallway. Within minutes, she was on the phone. The story reached the Ladies' Bridge Club within an hour and then spread through Davenport's social elite like wildfire. I returned home completely unaware of the social storm I had unleashed. The first consequences for Megan hit the next morning. Her yoga instructor at the exclusive studio asked her to leave during the middle of the session. The cold explanation was that they prefer members with family values. Kyle's invitation for lunch at the country club was rescinded with a polite but firm phone call. Their regular table at Romano's restaurant became permanently unavailable. Megan's confusion turned into growing anger as the pattern became clear. Saturday morning brought Kyle's most humiliating moment. His golf foursome made transparent excuses and left early. The pro shop manager then suggested that Kyle might be more comfortable elsewhere. He walked to his car alone, understanding that everyone knew about the funeral. Megan's shopping experience at Bergdorf's boutique shattered her remaining illusions. The sales associates gave her a cold reception instead of their usual warm service. Her credit application faced mysterious delays, and the manager suggested she might prefer to shop elsewhere. Kyle's professional isolation proved to be just as devastating. Job interviews were cancelled without any explanation. Former business contacts stopped returning his calls. His networking lunch at the Chamber of Commerce became awkward and brief, as potential employers already knew the story before he had even arrived. The final straw came at Elite Salon, where Megan's regular appointment was suddenly cancelled. She overheard other clients talking about her heartless husband, and she fled in tears. A local newspaper society columnist mentioned the disappointing absence at Margaret's service, and members of their church congregation openly expressed their disapproval. Former friends began to avoid Kyle and Megan at public events. Kyle's desperate attempts to explain the situation were met with universal disbelief, and his claims that I was exaggerating were useless. Davenport's tight-knit community had already rendered its verdict. Megan's breakdown was inevitable. She confronted Kyle about their ruined reputation, demanding that he fix the situation immediately. When he admitted that he did not know how, she threatened to leave him if things did not improve. I heard about these social consequences from various sources, feeling satisfied that justice was being served in a natural way. The community's values aligned with my own: family loyalty, respect for the dead, and basic human decency. Kyle had violated all of them. The community was honoring Margaret's memory by rejecting those who had dishonored it. My phone rang during breakfast. It was the bank manager, David Harrison, and his voice was filled with professional concern. He told me that Kyle and Megan's mortgage payment was 30 days overdue and asked if I was still guaranteeing the loan. I paused, considering the implications. I told him that I would like to schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning to discuss changes to my guarantees. I knew that financial pressure would finish what social exile had begun. At 9 a.m. I walked through the marble lobby of the First National Bank, past the oil portraits of the founding members who had built their fortunes on honest work and family values. Bank manager David Harrison's corner office overlooked the Mississippi River, where barges carried cargo that had built Davenport's prosperity for generations. I could tell by David's nervous demeanor that he was uncomfortable as he reviewed Kyle and Megan's files, which were spread across his mahogany desk. Mortgage papers, loan agreements, and guarantee forms created a paper trail of financial dependency that was about to end. He told me that he appreciated me coming in on such short notice. His voice had an uncomfortable formality to it. He then told me that Kyle's mortgage was now 60 days delinquent and that the amount due was $18,400. I remained perfectly composed with my hands folded. I told him that I understood he needed my guaranteed payment. He said that yes, that was what he expected, since I had been paying for the last 3 months. I withdrew my guarantee, effective immediately. The banker's face went pale. He said he did not understand, since I had been guaranteeing this loan for 8 years. I presented the pre-drafted legal documents from Robert Chen's office. I told him that everything was in order, including the 30-day notice required by law. David frantically called the bank's legal department while I sat quietly, watching the morning traffic cross the bridge. The lawyer's voice through the speakerphone confirmed what David feared. My withdrawal was perfectly legal. This means we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings, David said weakly. I replied that I understood and that he should please expedite the process. Meanwhile, across town, Kyle endured his 10th job interview in 2 weeks. The interviewer's cold reception followed a pattern he'd learned to expect. His prepared explanations about seeking new challenges fell on deaf ears that had already heard the funeral story. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Foster. We'll be in touch." The polite dismissal carried a sense of finality. Kyle's growing desperation showed in his slumped shoulders as he walked to his aging Toyota. The BMW had been repossessed last month. That afternoon, Megan discovered the credit card crisis at Nordstrom. Her platinum card was declined for a simple purchase, mascara to replace the one she'd cried away. There must be some mistake, she told the embarrassed sales associate. Her angry call to the credit card company revealed the truth. Your cosigner has withdrawn his guarantee. The account is suspended pending full payment of the outstanding balance. Megan's public humiliation deepened as other customers watched her argue with customer service. The crystal-clear reality hit. I had systematically removed every financial safety net they'd taken for granted. Kyle and Megan returned home to find the electricity disconnected. The utility company's notice cited unpaid bills totaling over $1,200. Kyle's failed negotiations with the payment department ended when they discovered his employment termination. Their first night by candlelight became a crash course in reality. Megan paced their dark living room, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors, accusing Kyle of destroying their lives. His weak attempts to blame me for being vindictive were met with her growing hysteria. Fix this or I'm gone, she declared with venom. Kyle's desperate credit applications were denied instantly. His debt-to-income ratio had become impossible without steady employment. Megan's maxed-out cards offered no relief. For the first time, they discussed bankruptcy with genuine fear. The garage sale of their luxury items brought pathetic returns. Wedding gifts that had cost guests hundreds sold for $20. Former friends drove past but didn't stop. Megan watched her jewelry collection disappear to strangers while Kyle sold his golf clubs to a teenager. The BMW's repossession in broad daylight provided the neighborhood's entertainment. Kyle's humiliation was complete as he removed his personal items under the repo man's impatient watch. Megan screamed at the driver while neighbors peered from their windows. I drove past their house that evening, observing the visible chaos with satisfaction. This wasn't cruelty. It was a consequence. Margaret had always taught me that actions have results. Kyle was finally learning that lesson. When Kyle called, begging for a face-to-face meeting and claiming he had something important to say, I agreed to meet at Morrison Park the next afternoon, the same park where I taught him to ride a bicycle 30 years ago when he still looked at me with love instead of calculation. I hung up and looked at a framed photo of young Kyle on his bicycle, remembering simpler times. Then I set the photo face down on my desk. 6 months after my bank meeting, the county foreclosure auction took place on the courthouse steps. I observed from across the street in my black sedan, watching as 1247, Maple Avenue, Kyle and Megan's former dream home, went up for public sale. The county auctioneer read the legal description with bureaucratic precision, while a small crowd of real estate investors and curious onlookers gathered. Kyle and Megan stood apart from the crowd, Megan's tears reflecting the morning sunlight. Through my binoculars, I watched their final humiliation unfold. Opening bid is $280,000 for this 4-bedroom colonial, the auctioneer announced. A woman in a navy business suit raised her hand confidently. Kyle frantically tried to identify her while whispering urgently to Megan. The bidding reached $315,000 with only 2 participants remaining, the mystery woman and a local contractor. When my attorney, Robert Chen, arrived and nodded to the woman, Kyle's growing suspicion crystallized into a shocked realization. That's Dad's lawyer, he whispered to Megan, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. Megan's disbelief was audible. He couldn't. Kyle's desperate attempt to approach the mystery bidder was prevented by courthouse security. The auction continued with mechanical efficiency while Kyle's world collapsed in real time. $317,000, called the woman in navy blue. Going once, going twice, sold. Kyle's legs gave out, and Megan's scream of, "This is our home," echoed off the courthouse walls as the auctioneer's gavel sealed their fate. I exited my car and walked toward the courthouse steps, my presence causing Kyle to understand the complete scope of my 6-month strategy. The guarantee withdrawal, the perfect timing, the bid amount calculated to exactly match the mortgage balance. Everything had been orchestrated with business precision. The mystery bidder revealed herself as Sarah Mitchell, my trusted secretary, acting as an agent for the newly formed Mitchell Holdings LLC. Kyle stumbled toward me on shaking legs, his broken voice barely audible. "How could you do this to us?" he asked. "I didn't do anything," I replied calmly. "The bank did." His desperate pleas about Margaret's favorite garden and her love for this house were met with my cold response. "Margaret's not here to see what you've become." Megan's final attack came as a wild lunge, screaming accusations about elder abuse and mental incompetence. Robert Chin documented her hysteria while security escorted her away from me. The entire scene provided perfect evidence of their true character. 2 weeks later, the moving truck looked pitifully small for their former life. Megan threw clothes into suitcases with violent anger while Kyle carefully wrapped Margaret's crystal vase, the last gift that connected him to his mother. Their former neighbors watched but offered no help. The social exile was complete. Megan's ultimatum came that evening. "I can't live like this anymore." Her confession about talking to her ex-boyfriend marked their marriage's breaking point. "I married into a wealthy family, not this." Her final cruel words cut deepest. "Your father was right about us." Kyle spent his final night alone in the empty house, walking through rooms filled with memories of better times. In the kitchen drawer, he found Margaret's hidden note. It read, "Kyle, remember we love you." For the first time, genuine tears of regret fell as he understood what he'd truly lost. I received the keys from Sarah Mitchell with quiet satisfaction. My decision to renovate the house and donate it to a deserving family would complete the circle. Margaret would approve of this justice. That evening, Kyle called from a payphone outside a cheap motel. His cell service had been cancelled. The phone rang in my house, but seeing Kyle's name on the caller ID, I let it go to voicemail. The final confrontation could wait. Kyle arrived at my front door at 7:30 p.m. on a cold November evening, 3 months after losing the house. His finger hovered over the doorbell for a full minute while I watched from the living room window, debating whether to answer. When I finally opened the door, I didn't invite him inside. Kyle's appearance shocked me. He was unshaven, wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans. He'd aged 5 years in 6 months. His obvious weight loss and defeated posture contrasted sharply with his former arrogance. "Dad, I know I messed up terribly," he said, and his voice shook as he launched into a rehearsed speech about understanding his mistakes now. I listened to him passively from the doorway as he described living in a studio apartment above a laundromat, working at a gas station for minimum wage, and Megan leaving him for her ex-boyfriend who owned a restaurant chain. "I've learned my lesson about what really matters," he claimed. When he switched tactics, suggesting I was lonely in this big house and offering to be the son Mom wanted me to be, I recognized every manipulation technique he was using. "When is your mother's birthday?" I asked suddenly. Kyle paused, then guessed wrong. "June 15th. What was her favorite flower?" "Roses." Another wrong answer. "Margaret loved daisies." My realization was complete. Kyle had never really known Margaret at all. His growing frustration with my questions revealed his true nature. The old entitled tone crept back. "This is ridiculous. Just tell me what you want me to say." Eventually, his real purpose emerged. "Okay. Yes, I need help." He described the eviction notices, the desperate promises to pay me back when he got on his feet, and the suggestion that I was wealthy enough to help family. Kyle still saw me as an ATM. His final manipulation involved Margaret. "Mom would be heartbroken to see us like this. She always believed in second chances. I miss her, too, Dad. We both loved her." For a moment, I wavered, remembering Margaret's kind heart. Then I realized this was exactly what Margaret had feared. "You want to know what your mother really thought?" I retrieved Margaret's hidden journal from her nightstand and read her own words. "I'm worried Kyle only loves our money. What if we've raised a child who can't love?" Kyle's shocked silence told me everything. Margaret died knowing what you really are, I said calmly. She changed her will before dying. She left you nothing because she knew you'd waste it. Kyle's mask finally dropped completely. His angry threats about contesting the will and calling me senile revealed his vindictive nature. His final cruel words, "I hope you die alone in this house," gave me complete satisfaction at seeing his real character. I stepped back and closed the door quietly. Kyle pounded on it for several minutes while I walked to the kitchen and made tea as if nothing had happened. When his car finally drove away, I sat in Margaret's favorite chair, holding her journal, feeling completely at peace for the first time since her death. Looking at our wedding photo, I said quietly, "It's finished, my love." 1 year later, I walked through Riverside Cemetery on a sunny May morning, carrying fresh daisies to Margaret's grave. Birds sang in the oak trees while spring flowers bloomed along the walking paths. I looked healthier and more at peace than I had in years. Kneeling beside Margaret's polished granite headstone, I arranged the new daisies while speaking softly about the Margaret Foster Memorial Foundation's thriving first year. 20 scholarships had been awarded to deserving students, and $200,000 had been donated to cancer research in Margaret's name. The community center dedication was planned for Margaret's birthday. "Kyle works at Sam's gas station on Route 6, I reported matter-of-factly. His divorce was finalized. Megan remarried to her restaurant owner. Kyle lived in complete social isolation and financial struggle. I felt no satisfaction in his suffering, only justice." Leaving the cemetery, I stopped at Morning Glory Diner. Kyle worked behind the counter, wearing a stained uniform. Our eyes met across the diner. His shocked recognition and visible shame were palpable as I calmly ordered coffee, treating him like any service worker. "How are you doing, Dad?" Kyle's voice carried genuine humility for the first time. "I'm well, thank you." "I know sorry isn't enough," he said quietly. "No, it isn't." Kyle's admission surprised me. "I understand now what I lost. It was never about the money, was it? You wanted me to love you, not your wallet. Your mother won that, too." For the first time, Kyle's tears seemed genuine. "I did what I had to do," I explained. "Margaret would have approved. I have no regrets about any of it." "I know," Kyle accepted. "I deserved all of it." "Yes, you did." When Kyle asked if there was any way back, I answered honestly. "I don't know. Maybe. You'd have to prove you've really changed. Not with words. Show me through your actions." I described my new life. I volunteered at the community center, had new friendships with other volunteers, and had Sunday dinners with the Johnson family, whose daughter had received a scholarship. I was dating Grace, a kind widow from church. My life was full of purpose and genuine relationships. Visiting Sarah Patterson, our first scholarship recipient, brought me deep satisfaction. Her gratitude for the opportunity to attend nursing school was immense. Her letter to Margaret's memory was on the Foundation's website. Margaret's memory lived on through education. Driving home past Kyle's old house, I saw that the Ramirez family had transformed it into a home filled with love and gratitude. Mr. Ramirez waved to me from the garden Margaret once tended. Children played where Kyle once played. The house embodied everything Margaret had valued. That evening, I prepared dinner in the kitchen I once shared with Margaret, setting one place without sadness. My phone rang with Grace calling about our weekend plans. I smiled. It was the first genuine happiness I had felt since Margaret's death. Standing in the garden at sunset, pruning Margaret's rose bushes, I felt the peace of a man who had fought for justice and won. My certain knowledge that I'd honored my wife's memory brought me complete satisfaction. Going to bed early, I slept soundly for the first time in 2 years, dreaming of Margaret smiling and telling me, "You did the right thing, Alan. I'm proud of you." Justice was served. Love had required tough choices, but they were the right choices. Rest in peace, my love.